David, welcome. It's such a privilege and honour to meet you today and get to chat about two huge passions of mine. First of all, Formula One, the sport of which you've spent a lifetime participating, but also, of course, here at Data Unlocked, the topic of data and its relevance to Formula One. Now, I have been watching you for many years on television, both behind the wheel of a Formula One car and also nowadays on the track side, interviewing the winners of the latest Grand Prix. Many of our audience will have done the same, but for those that haven't, David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to have this discussion. For those who are not familiar with me, I'm hoping they're familiar with Formula One, the fastest, most technologically advanced sport in the world. This year, we've had 22 Grand Prix, and it truly is a world championship. You know, we start in the Middle East in March, and we'll finish up there again in November, and we cover all the continents apart from Africa at the moment, but Formula One is working towards having a Grand Prix back there in the future. So it's been a passion of mine since I was a little boy growing up in Scotland. The crash helmet you can see over my shoulder has the Scottish colours draped over the top of it. But don't worry, I'm not some sort of hairy-arsed Highlander. I'm a proudly British traveller of the world. And I started in Formula One in 1994 as a Williams race driver. Tragic loss of Ayrton Senna, who was the lead driver in the San Marino Grand Prix, led to me being promoted from test driver. And I raced for Williams for a couple of years, McLaren for 9 seasons, and then I rounded off my career at Red Bull with 4 seasons there. So moved into broadcasting in 2009, and I continue to work as part of the Channel 4 Formula One broadcasts around the world. So motor racing's in my blood. I know there's many other great sports out there, and I'm willing to debate how great they are in comparison. But I really love how, for me, Formula One is more than just human against human in the field of play. There's so many layers that go into designing, building, delivering the race car to the track before the actual race driver, of which there are 20 Formula One drivers, get behind the wheel and then go out and compete. And it's a sport that's driven by new technologies. It's driven by the need for developing your software packages, for harnessing the data that comes from the car. Everything we do is so highly regulated that without data, we would have no backbone to stand the sport up on.
That's one of the things I love most about F1. I mean, there's the glamour, the speed, the jeopardy on Grand Prix day. But for me, it's kind of the ultimate team sport, isn't it? The driver is part of the package that wins the race, but it's also the 1,000 engineers back at the factory designing the vehicle. And it always amazes me how two completely separate teams working from a rule book and an otherwise blank piece of paper 6 months later have a car that finishes within 500ths of a second, the same lap time. Data, of course, imbued across all of that. Just going back to the geography point that you made, David, and joining the broadcasting side of the sport in 2009, that was a great time to decide to do that because Formula One has been very much up and to the right in the last 15 years. Many of our audience today across Europe, Asia Pac, but also particularly in the US. Can you just talk real briefly about how the sport's evolved and the impacts of Drive to Survive and the first Las Vegas Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time?
Yeah, there's been incredible growth in the reach of Formula One since I started as a driver back in 94. Back then, there was 15 Grand Prix. It was largely a European championship. We did have Canada, we did have Brazil, Argentina, Australia, Japan, China wasn't on the calendar then, actually. Middle East wasn't on the calendar. So there's been tremendous growth, and probably most notably and definitely most exciting into America, where we now have 3 Grand Prix. Austin was first to deliver a fantastic racetrack just outside the city, and they're now reaping the rewards of that early investment when people were still maybe a little bit lukewarm to what Formula One represented, because there's so many great sports in America and domestic sports. I often, with the greatest of respect to our American listeners, I always like to have a little dig at the fact that the World Series of baseball doesn't actually take part outside of the amazing country of America, whereas Formula One clearly is a true world championship. But we've got as far as Miami in the last couple of years, and in a couple of weeks' time, in fact, less than that, I'm going to be in Las Vegas for the first Vegas Grand Prix since 1984. Back then, it was held in a car park. I think it was Caesar's Palace car park, and now Formula One have built a custom track, new pit complex that will run along the strip and around the streets of Las Vegas, and I'm sure that's going to be quite a global visual. You know, Vegas is known internationally, but there's nothing quite like Formula One for putting countries on the global world stage, and that's why it's been used by many of the emerging markets to show that they're open for business when they can have a sport like Formula One there.
It's going to be an incredible camera angle as those 2023 generation cars go tearing down the straight past the fountains of the Bellagio. I think I'm excited about it as well. So, David, you mentioned how data is imbued across Formula One, across the sport. Where my mind often goes to immediately when we consider data in F1 is on the car, of course, the sensors and telemetry on the car. But that would be a subset or microcosm of how data is used across Formula One, such a high-performance sport where the smallest of margins matter, and also, of course, a multi-billion-dollar business. So could you give us a bit of a tour about how you think about data in the context of Formula One?
Yeah, the data, certainly in terms of the telemetry that your road cars operate nowadays, is so much more advanced than the data that was available to me when I first started in Formula One. The driver was still very much the voice of the car, and the data was fairly immature to where we have big data today. Is just incredible the way it's able to harness information, process that, and basically warn us of any up and coming issues. And that's what most of that data is used for. But if we come back right to the conception of a Grand Prix car, as you mentioned earlier, our sport highly regulated. There's a set of rules and regulations that define, let's think of it as a box, not a perfectly shaped box, a racing car shaped box, a template that the Formula One teams can design and develop their race car. And the intellectual property of all of the teams is proprietary. It's down to the individual teams, whether it's Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull. Coming back to what you said earlier, that you've got all of these incredible men and women designing these cars and then delivering them to the racetrack. The only common part is the Pirelli tires, which comes in contact with the tarmac. And for the rest, the engines, the gearboxes, the aerodynamic profiles are all completely down to the individual teams. And they'll be driven by humans around the track to within a thousandth of a second, as we've seen on many occasions this year. So when you bring it right back to the very point of how that team goes about deploying its assets, key assets, of course, being the human creative resource, AI is becoming a ever increasing important part of how the concepts and designs are developed, with millions of iterations running in simulation world before you go to the all-expensive commitment to design, to the actual manufacturing of those parts. And because we now run over the last couple of years and ongoing to a cost cap of 140 million. Now, 140 million in terms of big business is a relatively small number. To an everyday person in the street, of course, it's a huge amount of money. But that is the operational budget that the teams have to design, manufacture, and deliver their car over the course of the racing season. Now, these cars are constantly being adapted and changed and developed during the course of the year. And to give you an example of that, the car that won the first Grand Prix in Bahrain at the beginning of this year, if it was undeveloped, it would struggle to make the top 10 when it comes to the final race in Abu Dhabi. Such is the rate of development of all of the teams when they're taking these prototypes and over the course of those 22, 23 Grand Prix, developing the life out of them, all of the potential out of them. And then at the end of that year, those cars then are replaced by new cars for the following year. But during that process, there's a highly scientific and regulated deployment of the budget of that 140 million, which is controlled by the FIA, our governing body, and their teams of accountants. And they rely heavily on the data, both sides. The teams to deploy efficiencies in how they develop their package, and they don't run out of budget and therefore lose an opportunity to be competitive. And also from the regulator to be able to really trust in the information that's coming out of the teams, and to be able to then at the end of the year be not within a 10% margin, because 10% won't get you on the grid. We need to be down to tiny margins, and that is the efficiencies that the operations of the teams have to be across accounts, through the deployment of your human resource, through the cost of manufacturing, through cost of actually operation, taking your team to Australia, taking them to Vegas, your choice of hotels, your choice of airline companies. All of these decisions are now crucially important, and that highlights even more, I think, the hand in glove relationship with super efficient data companies and their ability to eke out the last little bit of efficiency from every opportunity. And for companies like yourself, more than ever, Formula One is an incredible platform to be able to show just how good you are at delivering your services.
It's so brilliantly described, David, and for us, so interesting how Formula One, the business of Formula One, I always think has been relevant for enterprise technology companies like ours and many others. When we think about understanding and being close to the audience of millions of Formula One fans, and making sure they get the best experience, it's maybe easy to connect the dots on how data technology that's also used in business is relevant to that. I think the cost cap for me, and as you've so elegantly described, is interesting because it brings the business side much closer to the speed at which the car can go, figuring out how to best deploy those $140 million, and how much of that is on materials, how much of it is on engineering, people's time, how much of it is on the computers running the CFD models, and in fact, as you mentioned, the airline tickets. I was chatting to an F1 team boss that we both know well, you probably better than me, the other day, and they were talking about how their booth at the side of the pit lane is now smaller than it used to be, because they figured out they didn't really need 6 people sat in it, only a couple, and it was cheaper to fly the smaller booth around the world, and therefore save the airfare to spend on just making the car go that tiny bit faster. Another area where the data and F1 worlds collide increasingly today and accelerating quickly, I think, David, is also AI. Talk to me about how AI is beginning to affect the sport overall, the business, and the way the cars are developed. We've all seen that predicted overtake lap thing at the bottom of the screen, and it figures out that you're 3 laps away. I think there's maybe the strategy side on working out the pit stops and the tyre changes, but could you bring that to life a bit for us?
Yeah, I think that any tool that enables you to be more efficient is welcomed with open arms. And there's obviously a lot of, within Formula One, there's a lot of discussion, and I've seen more recently in the media about the future of AI and how that should be regulated for the masses. But certainly within a sport right now, and I think across many sports actually, if I look at American football or soccer or whatever it happens to be, there's a lot more of the technology supporting the decisions of the classic manager standing on the lines and shouting, bring that guy off and send the other person on. There's a lot more technology and information available to be able to make better decisions as to whether people are on form. A large part of where AI is absolutely exploded within the world of Formula One and is being, taken as far as it possibly can, and of course that's changing day to day, week to week, is in the simulation technology, in the design phase of the race cars, right through to, as you mentioned, the strategy. Every team has a named and designated strategist who would be well known to the many followers of Formula One, but they just happen to be the human that's deploying the information that's being delivered to them using the programs and software and the AI that's more capable of making non-emotional, not decisions, but presenting information to you in a non-emotional way based on hard facts. And the great thing about hard facts is you can try and argue with them, but you'd be wrong. And of course, when it comes to predictive technology, that is predicting based on the human element delivering on its previous performance, which will always be in sport a variable. And I think thankfully so, because we're human, and an emotional roller coaster that sport brings us all, whatever your chosen sport is, the highs of success and the lows of failure, which then become the building blocks of future success, that is a reflection of life. And I certainly, for one, don't want that element of human brilliance and human weakness to be taken away from our sports. But I don't think AI, in the context of what we're discussing, does at all. It just brings the best to such a high level of peak performance that I think that we more often than not get to observe human brilliance because of the support the AI is giving them to be able to then stand on the highest peak when they do their performance and to show the world how very good they are. And every generation should be better than the previous one. That's what we all hope for our children and our children's children. And all of this amazing technology is accelerating the potential of people and giving opportunity to many more. And Formula One is absolutely at the forefront of using that technology to accelerate how they bring forward their performance. And I think it's notable at the moment we've had a dominant year from Max Verstappen and Red Bull, one individual in a car, in a team which fields two cars. But we always tend to get, those sort of freaks of nature in sport at any given time. But as sure as that's happening right now, there will be a young pretender or maybe an old pretender like Lewis Hamilton or Fernando Alonso who comes and, next year fights him for that championship again, because you cannot rest in your laurels in sport and you cannot in business.
David, as a huge F1 fan, but also I'm sadly not an F1 driver nor team boss, but I am a data professional and data engineer, and it's really exciting to think that it's the teams that are able to harness data the best, AI the best, and pull together the best drivers and the best aerodynamicists, but also the best data engineers and data scientists in pursuit of designing the best possible car and getting the fastest lap time. It's those teams that are able to master that ultimately win and dominate and pass the finish line first. And that's a great segue, by the way. Notable perhaps Interlagos last week, first place Red Bull, second place McLaren. Your two former teams, David, I'm sure those two things are tightly and perfectly correlated. But you are well positioned to answer the question of, I'll ask you two, a short one for fun, and then a second more important one for F1 fans. So Las Vegas Grand Prix on at the 18th of November. Who do you think is going to win? I guess we can both answer that one, but I'll ask you the question anyway. But related, who do you think is best placed to take on the dominance of Max and of Red Bull and that amazing car that they've built? Do you think next season is a rerun and 80% of the race is getting won by Max, or do you think someone can take the fight to them?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Nothing lasts forever. And as they say in investments, past performance is no guarantee of future success. And, sport is a great reminder of that. I should say that as I speak to you from my apartment, it just happens to be a Red Bull helmet that's sitting there from my racing days. I also have a McLaren one. So if they'd won in Brazil, then maybe I would have maybe I should have had them both there if I knew
you were going to. They did a solid job. I mean, they weren't threatening to win, were they? But
well, they got that sprint race win in Qatar with Oscar Piastri, and Lando Norris for me is absolutely a star of the future as well. So that's a great thing about the sport. McLaren qualified, I think, on the 7th or 8th row at the first Grand Prix in Bahrain in March. And then in the last several races, they've been competing for podiums. They've had a sprint race victory. That shows how they have taken what was a very difficult start to the year. They've analysed the information they have available to them, not only in their own performance, the performance of their competitors, through sound analysis, through track analysis. So you get a very good understanding of where your strengths and weaknesses are. And they've set about deploying their financial assets, their human resource, to then developing their car to a point where it's pushing the Red Bull very, very quickly. So in answer to the first question, who's going to win in Vegas? I think that no guarantee it will be Red Bull by any stretch, because Vegas, let's say it could be a little bit like Singapore in as much that...
Oh, yeah, bogey track.
Yeah, they struggled in Singapore. And the curveball for everybody, and the one thing that nobody knows, is that Las Vegas in November, it may be, double digits during the day, but in the evening, it will be below 10 degrees. We haven't had a Grand Prix that cold in a very long time. And, the Grand Prix will start at 10 p.m. local time. Track temperature the air temperature probably 7-8 degrees. Drivers will maybe need to wear thicker gloves, because when their hand comes out the top of the cockpit, they'll be getting a wind chill driving at 200 miles an hour along the strip. So tire temperature is a crucial part of overall performance. And as we speak, nobody knows, whether their car will work on that track at that track temperature. So I think that that's an exciting twist to the last two Grand Prix. And then I have to, at this point, recognize the fact that my memory is pretty bad. And was the second question, who's going to challenge?
Who's best placed to take on Red Bull next year? A little bit of a resurgence from Mercedes. Yeah. Slightly biased for me as a bit of a Mercedes fan, but close in Mexico. McLaren looking really quick, but also you do get the feeling that Max Verstappen's probably not trying, even though he's got a 30-second lead. And they've been developing next year's car since middle of the summer, perhaps. So is next season a rerun of this season with Max just out the front and everybody else racing for second place in the midfield, or do you think someone can catch them up?
I do believe someone can catch them up. I'm not a betting man, but if you wanted to place a safe bet, yes, Max Verstappen, he's a 3-time world champion. He's dominated this year. And the reality check is that his teammate, who is second in the world championship, so confirming the fact that it's a dominant race package, but he's like half the points that Max has achieved this year and only achieved a couple of Grand Prix victories. So the human factor at the end of what is a highly data-driven industry is still massively important. And when you get any elite athlete, whether it's in tennis, whether it's track and field, soccer, baseball, whatever, when you get any elite, male or female, at the peak of their brilliance, then it becomes very tough for the other merely great human beings to beat them. But history suggests that nothing lasts forever, and you've got a very motivated Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes. You've got an incredibly motivated Ferrari, of course, with the Tifosi. Many Italian race fans around the world. McLaren, former world championship team, someone that I drove for 9 seasons, knocking on the door. So I wouldn't at all, write off next year's championship as a Max Verstappen Red Bull championship. And I think, frankly speaking, for the sport, I think for Max, for us all, having different winners is what pushes us all forward. Success is a lousy teacher, I believe. Some famous businessman in America said, maybe it was Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, but it makes people think they can't fail. In this sport, you get reminded very quickly if you think you can't fail. There may be many businesses that have failed because they rested on the laurels or didn't adapt to new technologies. But in your mind, in your heart, and in your business, that what makes your company stand out is your ability to look beyond what you're delivering right now and not be satisfied. Because if you close the book on what you're delivering today, then your competitors, they will just come along and they'll be looking to overtake you. And your drive and your focus and all of the drive and focus of your team and your company is what makes you a world best achieving company.
Well, David, thanks very much. I like you, I look forward to a closer competition at the front of the pack, but it's been so fascinating hearing from you the insight of the business of F1, the sport, the experience of the driver, but also for our audience today of data professionals and data engineers, the very real way in which the work that we do as an industry makes the car go faster. I'll look out for you in Las Vegas. Having spent time there in November before, I will agree it is cold, and a street circuit with cold tyres could make for a very exciting and dramatic race, but I'll be the one with the scarf and gloves because I feel the cold, David. Either way, I hope it's a great race. So lovely to meet you today, and thank you so much.
No, thank you. And to everyone listening, to all of you bright folks out there that create some incredible technologies. I have been an end user. I've been a customer. I was a mere driver, but I've been lucky enough to be around incredible data scientists and engineers and people that had a vision and were able to create on that vision and allow me to then exploit potential of a motor vehicle around the racetrack. So thank you on behalf of the drivers, and thank you very much for the opportunity to have the chat today.
Of course, David, thank you so much.